Hi everyone, this is Karen.
Hey everybody, I'm Shane.
Today we're looking at part 2 of handy little bands, and the vocabulary words are obvious.
Obvious.
It is obvious that you miss home.
Chop.
Chop.
First, I need to wash and chop the vegetables.
Hanger.
Hanger.
I ran out of clothes hangers, so I threw the rest of the clothes on my bed.
You're so lazy. Jar.
Jar.
Brian dropped a jar of jam on the floor, but luckily it didn't break.
Marvelous.
Marvelous.
We had a marvelous day at the park with you.
Thank you. I'm very Oh, you like my marvelous earrings?
What do you have on your ears?
They're not very obvious, are they? Because they're the same color as my skin almost. But
I can't believe you're using the rubber bands as your earrings.
they're so handy. So if I need a rubber band for something, I just grab it right from my ear. Ready to go. If I need to flick you, boom.
But I guess you're right. There's so many different, places or different situations where we can use the rubber bands.
So in your home, what are you using rubber bands for right now?
Well, like when I open a package, for example, or a bag of chips or something, a bag of flour, and then I didn't finish it, right?
Yep.
Then I would need to close it. I would just use a rubber band and tie it around.
Me too.
Yeah.
So in my house, I'm using lots of rubber bands to close packaged food that was already opened.
Yes.
Also, if you're trying to open a jar and your hand keeps slipping because maybe you're a little bit sweaty or it's wet, you can put a rubber band around it, and this can cause friction, and then you can open the jar.
Speaking of friction, though, sometimes you have your cutting board, and then when you're cutting or chopping something, it will be slipping around. But if you tie the rubber bands on both sides,
You don't have to tie it, just put the rubber bands around it.
you're right.
Yeah.
You just tie it. You just put it around the cutting board. Then it will create friction. Then your cutting board wouldn't slip.
Rubber bands, they're so small and
Useful.
simple, but so useful.
I know.
Awesome.
Handy little bands.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Next time.
Handy little bands.
Of course, binding things together is perhaps the most obvious way to use rubber bands around the house, to close open packages of food, to tie up hair or loose wires, and so on. But the rubber band can be used for far more than that.
Today's lesson is called Handy Little Bands, Part 2. Hi everyone, my name is Jeff.
And I'm Mike, and we're learning about rubber bands, those handy or useful and reliable little things we have around the home. We wrap boxes in them, wrap things up with them. You can tie your hair up with them, put them around your wrist if you want to remember something. That's something people use rubber bands for. All sorts of uses. Rubber's been around for thousands of years, but rubber bands, especially having them commonly in your home, is something that only goes back to the 1920s when William Spencer had the idea to wrap newspapers up in them, so when they were delivered in the morning, they wouldn't blow apart. The rubber band would do what rubber bands do. Keep them tightly wrapped up. Keep them together.
That's what you do with rubber bands, right? You bind things together. But remember, these are handy little things. If one thing only did one thing well, that wouldn't really be handy. Or at least it wouldn't be handy like rubber bands are. Anyways, let's move on and start reading. Of course, binding things together is perhaps the most obvious way to use rubber bands around the house. To close opened packages of food, to tie up hair or loose wires, and so on. But there's just so much more to the rubber band. It's more than a one-trick pony.
All right, yeah, but obviously, or the obvious thing to do with rubber bands is to use their ability to snap closed, to keep things tight. That's obvious. That's clear to be seen. This adjective basically means something that's clear to be seen, something that would be most people's first guess or something like that. If I said, oh, you went to Paris, did you see the Eiffel Tower? Well, of course we saw the Eiffel Tower. It's big. It's famous. It would be really weird if we went to Paris and didn't see the Eiffel Tower. It's very, very obvious, all right? So something that's easy to understand, easy to see, or something that most people would figure out without any help is probably quite obvious. So, for example, it is obvious that you miss home. You keep looking at pictures of your family and going, that kind of thing makes it pretty easy for me to guess that you're homesick right now.
Now, like I said before, rubber bands are not one-trick ponies. They can do so much more than just bind things in a simple way. They're super, super handy, super durable. They can be adapted to many, many different things. Yes, the next line tells us, but the rubber band can be used for far more than that, than just binding things in a simple way, I should say. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and take a short break, but don't go away. We'll have more on the rubber band after this.
Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny。我们在第一天的课文读到，橡皮筋是在19世纪发明的，不过要到1920年代，它才成为家家户户里面常见的用品。那么课文提到说，橡皮筋最显而易见的使用方法就是拿来绑东西嘛，像是把打开的食物包装把它封起来啊，绑头发或者是捆住电线等等。不过橡皮筋的用途不止于此。我们先来看单字 obvious。Obvious， 它是形容明显的、显然的、显而易见的。那 Charles 老师刚刚说，橡皮筋并不是 one trick pony， 字面意思是只会一招、只会一种把戏的小马。那它是用来比喻只有一技之长、只擅长一个领域的人，或者是呢只有单一用途的物品。好，接回课文中。
Handy little bands.
Due to the fact that they create friction between surfaces, rubber bands are an excellent way to stop things from slipping. If you're chopping vegetables in your kitchen, for example, and you don't want your chopping board to slide around, place a rubber band on either end and, hey presto! Similarly, if your clothes keep on slipping off your hangers, attaching a rubber band to the hanger will provide enough friction so that your clothes stay put. Having trouble opening a jar because of sweaty hands? Wrap a rubber band around the lid, and the added friction allows you to open it with ease.
Okay, rubber bands. They can do so much more than just bind things. Get this. Due to the fact that they create friction between surfaces, rubber bands are an excellent way to stop things from slipping.
Oh, interesting. Absolutely. Well, yeah, rubber does create friction. It's hard to push something that's wrapped in rubber across the floor. Of course, many types of furniture, they have those little rubber caps on the bottom of the legs of a chair, for example, to stop it from sliding around. But rubber bands, since they're made of rubber, can do something similar. And you can use them in lots of different ways. Here's a good one. If you're chopping vegetables in your kitchen, for example, and you don't want your chopping board to slide around, place a rubber band on either end and, hey presto, just like magic, the rubber band will keep your chopping board from sliding around, maybe on a wet counter in your kitchen. That's very useful and safe too.
Because of the friction there, those rubber bands will hold that chopping or cutting board in place. It won't slide around. Anyways, here we've got this verb chop to talk about. When you chop something, you're kind of cutting it, but with a hacking action, okay? Usually when you cut with a knife, you might go back and forth slowly and cut things into two pieces. When you chop, you might use a knife and you might cut into things like so with a hacking action. Now, very often when people cut down trees, they chop down those trees. They use an axe and they cut down that tree one blow, one strike at a time. For example, first, I need to wash and chop the vegetables. I need to reduce these vegetables to smaller pieces, so I'm going to chop them up.
All right, and if your cutting board or your chopping board is sliding around, put some rubber bands on it. That will make it much safer. Here's another good one to stop things from sliding around. Similarly, if your clothes keep on slipping off your hangers, attaching a rubber band to the hanger will provide enough friction so that your clothes stay put. Yeah, sometimes, especially if your shirt's made of like silk or one of those very smooth materials, you put it on the hanger and it just slips right off. Well, put some rubber bands on that hanger and that will hold on to that fabric, make it less slippery so it won't fall off. And here, of course, we're talking about these hangers. Another actually useful thing that we have all around our homes and don't really think about. Hangers are those things kind of shaped like a triangle with a little hook on the top, and you put your shirts and you can hang your pants through the middle of them. And then, of course, you use them in your cupboard or when you're drying your clothes after you wash them. You get hangers from the store or maybe from a dry cleaner. But if you're hanging clothes and you want them to sort of be nice and straight and you don't want to fold them up, get a hanger, get a coat rack, and use that hanger to hang your clothes. For example, I ran out of clothes hangers, so I threw the rest of the clothes on my bed. Well, you could do that when you're doing your laundry, but you don't want to sleep on top of your clothes.
Probably. That's a temporary solution to a problem. Yeah. Anyways, next we have a question for you.
Okay.
Having trouble opening a jar because of sweaty hands?
I'm at a picnic, it's hot, and I want to eat some pickles. Oh,
but your hands are sweaty?
I can't open it. I can't eat through the glass.
You can't properly grip that particular jar. Rubber bands will come in handy there as well. Anyways,
Jeff?
Before we move on, let's talk about what a jar is. Usually a jar is a glass container. And my favorite jar is the pickle jar. In my fridge, you can always find a jar full of sweet gherkin pickles. They're like candy. But I'm more interested in talking about what a jar is. It's a glass container that usually looks like a glass with a lid on it. Okay, you can always seal a jar. For example, Brian dropped a jar of jam on the floor, but luckily, it didn't break.
Was it made of rubber?
I don't know if you could call a rubber container like that a jar. I'm thinking he was happy, okay, that this jar didn't break because he dropped it and it was made from glass.
Well, that's good. It probably landed on his foot first, which would hurt. But at least it didn't break.
But it didn't break.
There you go. Yeah, honey, jam, peanut butter, pickles, olives. I have a jar of olives in my fridge. Very useful for holding food. But yeah, sometimes that lid, the top, the part you take off to get the good food inside, it's on really tight, you know. There's no one strong around. What are you going to do? Wrap a rubber band around the lid. Sweaty hands or even just a lid that's on too tight, get yourself a little bit of help with a rubber band. Wrap a rubber band around the lid and the added friction allows you to open it with ease. Or even better, get a towel or something that will stop your hand from slipping. The towel plus the rubber band, that lid will be, you'll be taking that food out, you'll be the master of that lid in no time.
I couldn't have possibly said it any better myself.
I can't wait to have a pickle.
It's just, I like pickles too. Yeah, anyways, rubber bands, they're super handy. And we'll learn some more about rubber bands after yet another break, so stay tuned.
橡皮筋除了用来绑东西，还有什么其他用途呢？课文提到说，橡皮筋可以用来阻止东西滑动，因为它会在表面产生摩擦力。像如果你在厨房里面切菜啊，你不想让这个砧板滑动的话，你就可以在其中一端摆放橡皮筋。那同样的，如果你的衣服老是会从衣架上面滑落，你就在衣架上面绑橡皮筋，就可以提供足够的摩擦力了。那这样一来，衣服就可以固定不动。还有呢，如果因为手出汗，你打不开玻璃罐，只要在盖子周围绕上一条橡皮筋，就会增加摩擦力，就可以轻松打开咯。我们先来看3个单字 ，chop 它表示切或者是剁，文中的 chopping board 就是指砧板。那么Jeff老师刚刚用到 hack 这个字 ，hack hack 这个动词它表示劈或是砍。下一个单字 hanger 它表示衣架。我们顺便学一下 coat rack 则是指衣帽架，它是拼作 C-O-A-T-R-A-C-K coat rack。 好，Mike 老师刚刚提到说，像丝绸这种布料，这很容易从衣架上面滑落。这时候老师他用到 fabric 这个字呢，是指布料或者是织物。这个字是拼作 fabric，fabric。好，我们再来看 jar 这个单字，它表示玻璃罐或者是广口瓶。人们常常会用玻璃罐来装果酱啊、腌黄瓜、橄榄等等的。我们顺便补充一下 pickle。Pickle 就可以用来指腌黄瓜，还有 olive 是指橄榄，它是拼作 olive olive。好，这边再来看3个重点。第一个是 keep on 加上动词 ing 是表达持续做某事，例如 He kept on interrupting me with questions， 他一直问问题打断我的话。好，第二个重点是 so that 是用来引导表示目的的副词子句，表示以便好让，这样一来才能怎么样。好，那在美语当中常常会省略 that， 例如Put on some sunscreen so that you don't get a sunburn， 也可以说 Put on some sunscreen so you don't get a sunburn， 擦点防晒乳，这样一来你才不会被晒伤。好，第3个重点 Stay put 是指固定不动，留在原地。那在口语当中常常会用 Stay put 来要别人停在原地不动，或者是保持原状。例如Stay put, don't go anywhere， 你就待在原地，哪儿都别去。好，接着回到课文中。
Handy little bands.
Without rubber bands, our lives would be a lot less convenient. Whether you're using one to open a jar or tie up your hair, don't forget the history or the people that made this tiny but marvelous invention possible.
Fact, everyone. Without rubber bands, our lives would be a lot less convenient. If you're only learning this now, well, congratulations. You now know that rubber bands are pretty much one of the great things ever invented, ever in the history of the world.
It's true. Think about it. We'd have to basically tie everything up using string or stick it together using tape or something like that. Yeah, none of those would be as convenient and useful and reusable as a rubber band. So here's a few other ideas, whether you're using one to open a jar or tie up your hair. Of course, the great ponytail. So whether you're using one to open a jar or tie up your hair, don't forget the history or the people that made this tiny but marvelous invention possible. It's one of those things you'll use, you don't even think about, you just reach for them. But yeah, do think about the history of it, where rubber came from, all these great people like Hancock and Spencer who kind of brought the rubber band and made us very, dependent on this marvelous invention. It's marvelous, it's fabulous, it's wonderful, it's fantastic. Marvelous is yet another an adjective that we use to talk about things that are just great.
For instance,
really great.
We had a marvelous day at the park with you.
That was a marvelous sentence.
I wish I could say that I was the one who wrote it. Oh. Anyways, speaking of writing, the person who wrote this article, I'm sure that they were in love with rubber bands, and their love really, really shone through it. I really feel it, but sadly, this article is now complete, and we have to now ask and then answer the what do you think question. Mike, can you think of any other uses for rubber bands that weren't mentioned in the article?
Well, I've seen people use rubber bands on their braces, right? They actually use them for medical reasons. If you have braces, those metal things that young people often might get on their teeth to make them straight. Sometimes they have rubber bands inside the mouth and it kind of moves your jaw and gives you that perfect smile. So yeah, rubber bands using in the health industry and in a medical type of way. We didn't mention that one, but there you go. Rubber bands have all sorts of uses around the home or even in your mouth.
That's it. All jokes aside, it's totally true. And rubber bands, the greatest thing since sliced bread, maybe even better than that.
You can hold your sliced bread together.
Wow.
With a rubber
mind blown. All right, everyone. Today's lesson is now officially complete, and it's time for us to say bye-bye.
Take care.
橡皮筋确实是个很神奇的小东西，少了橡皮筋，我们生活会变得不太方便。好，那除了用橡皮筋来开罐子、绑东西这些常见的用途之外呢，麦克老师还提到说，有的人戴牙套，你可能会看到他有使用这个橡皮筋。好，这时候老师说到 brace，B-R-A-C-E，brace 是指牙套，一般都是用复数形来表达。那么文中的单字 marvelous， 它是形容很棒的、不可思议的。有一个意思相近的字是 fabulous，F-A-B-U-L-O-U-S，fabulous 它是形容非常棒的、极好的，或是令人印象深刻的。好，那么 Jeff 老师他最后用到 the greatest thing since sliced bread， 用来描述橡皮筋。那么字面意思是说，从切片面包以来最棒的事物。那是因为以前美国卖的面包它是整条没有切的，后来发明了面包切片机之后，大家觉得太方便了，于是人们就会幽默的用 the best thing 或者是 the greatest thing since sliced bread 来表达非常棒的东西或是非常好用的新发明。好，以上是今天的讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
Hello， 各位同学，大家好，我是季安老师。我们今天带大家看简短独白。简短独白的第一种类型就是这个公告或者是宣布，也就是 announcement。常见的考点呢，这边你们要特别注意咯，这些是很常考的。如果考的是地点的话，其实从关键字当中可以去找得出来。OK， 好，比如说我们之前有讲过，比如说他讲的说，哎呦，这个热狗大特卖哦，然后青菜呢这个5折，然后呢饮料区呢全部免费喝到饱，这样有没有？然后这些东西呢，你就可以说啊，这是在超级市场 ，OK？ 或者是呢，他说，现在这个文学区的书啊，有一位作者来这边签名了，那他问你说这是在哪里？那文学区你就可以猜哦，他可能是在图书馆，对不对？或者是在书店里面，这些都是有可能的哦。所以你从全文的关键字里面去推测 ，all right？ 那再来公告的目的哦，通常这种目的前2句就会蹦出答案来了哦，就是主题句嘛。我们今天跟你讲说，我们这边宣布一下这件事情哦，一定这目的一定在前面就讲啊，不然的话哪叫开门见山法呢？对不对 ？OK？这个跟你们写作文也是有很大的关系的。你要讲一件事情，一开始就要讲重点哦，开门见山是比较好的。对象是谁是讲给谁听的？一样，你从场景当中可以去判断出来，它是讲给消费者听的，还是讲给乘客，还是讲给员工听的比如说在超级市场，那就是讲给消费者听的啦。那如果是在公车上啦，或者在捷运啦，在飞机上，就是乘客嘛，对不对？那员工的话，他可能就会讲一些公司内部的一些策略或者是新的规定。细节、产品特色、集合的时间或者是路径比如说他们是出去玩耍的话，就是说我们这个5点集合等等的这些就要注意一下，我们要走哪一条路这个A 路径因为那边有什么设施在装修，所以呢这边我们就不走，本来走 A 的嘛，那接下来要换到 C 之类的要求你要注意一下，听这个建议的字词 ，OK， 像是 remember。干嘛干嘛 ？Don't forget to do something, please。请求嘛，你应该要干嘛干嘛 ？You should 做什么事情 ，alright？ 所以这边是比较常见的考点好，那我们就来看一下这3题What's the main purpose of the talk？ 他讲这个东西主要是为了什么？通常在前面就会出来 ，alright？Explain why a flight hasn't taken off yet？ 为什么班机还没飞 ？B. To introduce a movie to airplane passengers， 把这个电影介绍给乘客。有这件事情吗？C. To welcome passengers on board a flight， 欢迎大家旅客登机。D 呢 To help passengers relax during bad weather， 可能遇到这个乱流，然后让大家轻松一下，好像有可能。第2个 How is the weather outside the cabin？ 外面的天气如何？Cloudy, clear, rainy 还是 snowy？ 听关键字最后 What will happen in 20 minutes？ 在20分钟会发生什么事情？到底是什么嘞？我们来听一下
Good evening, passengers. This is your captain speaking. First, I'd like to welcome everyone on board Sigma Flight 718, non-stop from New York to Singapore. We are currently cruising at an altitude of 40,000 feet The time is 7 p.m. The weather at our destination is clear and sunny with a high of 30 degrees. Right now, the weather outside is cloudy and mild turbulence is expected. So please remain seated as long as the red lights are on. A light snack and a beverage will be offered to you in 20 minutes. I'll talk to you again before we reach our destination. Until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight.
所以这3题应该就 OK 了嘛？这是机长广播。那机长广播这边是 Welcome passengers on board a flight。第一个是 C。那第二个呢，可能很多人会想要选 clear， 但是 clear 其实是他讲这个目的地的，所以这一题答案是 A cloudy。他刚刚有讲到。最后 What will happen in 20 minutes？ 20分钟之后会干嘛呢？答案是这一个 Passengers will have some refreshments。这3题呢，你可以就是重播就是回去再把这个题目再听一次 ，Alright？ 那我跟你说这个答案是在哪个地方哦？他前面讲说Good evening, passenger. This is your captain speaking. First, I'd like to welcome everyone on board. OK， 欢迎大家上机登机这样。OK， 好，这边我们看到说 The weather at our destination is clear and sunny。可能在这边就会被骗了，但是你看到 right now the weather outside is cloudy， 所以这一题就有一个小小的陷阱。那再来呢？ A light snack and a beverage will be offered to you in 20 minutes. 在20分钟，我们就要发这个饮料跟甜点了哈。Beverage 这个字如果还不知道的话，饮料就是这些汽水啦、咖啡啦、果汁啦。Light snack 就是小小的点心咯。OK， 所以这些都算是 refreshments。我们之前也有讲过，就是说你听力所听到的单字，我们刚刚讲的是这个 light snack， 还有 light snacks beverage， 就这边答案要选的是 refreshments， 所以它都会用同义字的方式去呈现。以上是我们今天的课程内容，我是建安老师，我们下堂课见，拜拜。
See you next time.